What happens after betrayal? Is healing and restoration possible? I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's a process. We have quite a story to share with you today. Jessica and Ryan McDaniel. Jessica and Ryan are both graduates of University of Texas at Austin, just in my back door, and they're also both graduates of Denver Seminary with counseling degrees. They counsel together at McDaniel Counseling. But most of what we talk about in this episode is their story. As God often does, the very places that He calls us to minister out of are from the places we have experienced brokenness and then His healing. So, in this conversation, first Ryan starts sharing some of his story, but keep listening because after a little while, Jessica shares her story, and it's not what you may first think when you hear Ryan's story. I don't want to give away details, but this isn't only Ryan's story, it's Jessica's story, in some ways even more. I'll let you see what that means as we get into this conversation. And then we spend a lot of time talking about the movements in the heart, the matters of the heart that are underneath the activities or behaviors or actions or whatever. That, I think, is perhaps one of the most important things that I hope you hear and take away from this conversation is what is going on underneath. So, Ryan and Jessica McDaniel. Jessica and Ryan McDaniel, it is a pleasure. It's a joy to see you here. Welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time and being here.
Thanks so much for having us. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited.
The topic we're talking about today is not an easy one. We're talking about just betrayal and healing and just all that goes into that in a marriage. I understand that you guys have a story, and I just want to start by giving you guys a chance to say, how did all this happen in your life? What led you to be where we are now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Now we have the privilege of working with people who've
Yeah.
been through infidelity. But yeah, that really all started with our own experience of that in our marriage. So that really started with me. And so, coming into marriage, I came into marriage with a hidden pornography addiction. And it was something, that we had barely, I think, touched on at all before marriage and throughout engagement. Um, but it had been a serious problem for me for years, since I was an adolescent. And like I've often heard my own clients tell me, there was this kind of false hope, I guess I'd say, in my mind that marriage would fix all this for me.
Yep.
And I'd say false hope because certainly after marriage realized that that was not the case. But I think even in my mind, if I was honest going into marriage, I knew it was not something that would be fixed by Jessica or by marriage. But so the way that really played out in marriage was it began to cause a lot of issues. And again, I wasn't being honest
Yeah.
with the extent of that for me and how I was acting out. I was acting out regularly using pornography, and it caused a lot of problems, and obviously in our own sexual intimacy,
Yeah.
but just every aspect of our relationship. This was kind of the cloud hanging over it that I knew what that cloud was, but Jessica was really in the dark. Um, and so this is at a time when we were going through our graduate program together, actually to become therapists, and this was a Christian program. And through that program and through those years, the Lord really began to convict me about this, and I really began to consider, along, through the spiritual guidance of
Yeah.
some of my professors and mentors, I began to consider what would it look like to be honest about this, to share this with Jessica. And eventually I did. And uh, I would say, even though I thought about it for a while, the actual planning of how to do that and the right way to do that was really done pretty hastily. So basically, what that looked like for me was just divulging this one day.
Blurt it out.
I have a
Yeah.
pornography addiction.
Well, and just to interject, it was, I have something really big that I need to talk to you about later.
There you go.
And then I had to wait. And then it came. So keep going.
Yeah.
And
Let me just pause for a second, Ryan.
absolutely.
You've said some things that I wholeheartedly believe that I hope people heard, that
Mhm.
pornography is not just about sex. I mean, the behaviors are sexual, but the way it impacted your relationship with Jessica was not just in the bedroom when you're trying to have sex or not, and just all of that. Can you just verbalize for a minute or two how it was impacting your relationship more broadly?
Sure, absolutely. I think in the time that I've really continued to grow and heal from that addiction, I realized a lot more about what's going on for me and driving that for me. I think at the time, how I would probably describe it is just like, yeah, I get really angry and defensive very often, and it was particularly related to like sex or sexual intimacy, but even it would come out in other ways, and that was really just um, a way to defend against the honesty of what was going on, right? And that shame cycle I knew I was experiencing at the time. But really practically, what that looked like was me turning down Jessica, right, when she wanted to be sexually intimate with me, right, and not being willing to talk through what was surrounding that, right? Because
Yeah.
I wasn't willing to be honest about that. But certainly all that rejection that I caused a deep wounding, in Jessica. And that was a wounding, I was aware of. I was hurting her, but was not willing to deal with, because I wasn't willing to address my own addiction.
Mm, mm. So, due date comes in some form.
Mhm.
You blurted out. First of all, Ryan, what was it like to tell her? What was the emotional content in you as, okay, now she knows?
Mhm. Yeah, I think leading up to it, probably terrifying is probably the best word to describe it. But again, I felt a courage in it, because I had this you know uh, several year process of like inviting the Lord into that, and he'd done a lot of work to show me that I was loved and accepted, um, apart from that, not apart from it, but God saw me as I really was, and he always had, but like I had accepted that in a deeper way. And so I had, kind of an inner freedom I'd been experiencing. And so sharing that with Jessica, it was very scary, but
Yeah.
also I had some confidence that things would be okay, or I would be okay. I would live. There was life on the other side of this. So yeah, shared that. But obviously, what I again would see later in time was there was still a deep kind of refusal in myself to acknowledge the pain I had caused,
Mm,
and to really face my shame.
wow.
And so, really, practically, what that looked like was just confessing this sin to Jessica, and just really hoping, expecting that she would be okay, that she would, get over it, that I wouldn't really have to walk through,
Mm,
the damage that had done, that it'd
wow.
be kind of closing that chapter. And it's like, okay, now we can live in
Yes.
this new life together. But that wasn't the case at all.
Mm. And I want to next get your take on all this, Jessica, but you're describing something that I have heard from couples not infrequently, and that is the person who has been hiding, acting out, whatever, they disclose, and there's a sense of, okay, now I've done it. Okay, I want to put that behind us now. And there's almost a relief, if that word is ever appropriate. But then for the spouse, it's a whole different experience. So, Jessica, for you, wow.
Yeah, it's hard to know where to enter in. I'll start from that point of disclosure, because when you said relief, it's actually something that Ryan described feeling and I felt myself.
Okay.
Oddly enough, because I was aware, like he was describing earlier, of this thing that was impacting our relationship and our intimacy and our closeness. It felt like I couldn't get quite as close to him as we had talked about and as close as I had wanted. And so when he finally was able to name what it was, I felt relief that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't making this distance or disconnect up. There really was something major that was going on. And so the relief came from knowing. And but immediately after so many stages of shock and anger and kind of like an overall injustice and unfairness, like how and why could this be happening to me? And it really revealed a lot of my my own preconceived notions about marriage that were wrong. That if I entered into marriage as a Christian, then we would not be struggling with this type of sin. You know, like we could handle maybe the small stuff, but I married, you know, a Christian man on purpose. I married a Christian man who led worship. In a way, I think maybe looking back to kind of like safeguard myself, I felt as though something about Ryan's, you know, like faith and his relationship with God could somehow spare me pain of what I had experienced in other relationships in the past. So I didn't realize I was putting so much of my own, I guess, comfort and security into his walk with the Lord. So even like remembering and thinking about it now, I mean, it was such a mix of emotions, such a devastating disclosure. And finally, we knew what we were working with here.
Yeah, I think of it now as, you know, setting the house on fire and walking out and saying, good luck. You know, that was really the intensity of what I think Jessica was dealing with, in the harshness that was really in my heart at the time.
Yeah. And I'm glad you both have highlighted that this was in the middle of a Christian experience. In fact, you were at seminary. You were, you know, both studying to be Christian counselors, and this was still, you know, part of life. And I'm grateful that you highlighted that part, because I believe, as you know, that's not unique. So you guys are still married. What was the next bit of the journey like?
Yeah, well, that's really, I think, where my part in our marriage story comes out. So in the midst of, I think that example is helpful, of lighting the house on fire and running out. I think in that I was willing to take some of the burnt damage and try to cause more harm to my husband. I was in so much pain and looking for help, I think in ways that looking back were not helpful. A lot of people invalidated my reaction. I had a pretty strong reaction to the pain that I was in, a lot of grief and a lot of sorrow, and it was minimized by others. It was seen as not that big of a deal because it was only pornography. I got kind of bad advice. Yeah, air quotations. I got the bad advice around like helping him to struggle well. And so I didn't know if I was supposed to be the accountability partner or making sure he wasn't staying up too late at night. So I kind of went through the whirlwind of chaos and confusion. And during that time, I brought into the marriage just a really longstanding pattern of flirtatious behavior with other men as a way to appease some of my own insecurities, as a way of looking for kind of comfort and attention from other men. I would minimize that myself by saying, "Oh, it's harmless, it's friendly, I'm very extroverted. This is just how I am with people." And so at the time, I was in a very vulnerable position with where I was working outside of school. So we both paid our way through grad school by waiting tables for me, and I was in an environment with a lot of men, and really found myself wanting more and more attention from people who maybe did see me as beautiful. I was really questioning how my husband saw me as a result of his addiction. And even though he would say he loved me and thought of me a certain way, I was not willing to hear that and accept that for what it was in my pain. So fast forward a little bit, I would say maybe within months after his disclosure, I picked up an emotional relationship with a male coworker. And I wouldn't have called it an emotional affair at the time. I think it was more pain management in my mind. But that emotional affair quickly turned into something physical. And at that point in time, I was so ashamed and surprised and disgusted with myself. I was hurting from the betrayal that I had experienced. And then in the very same breath, I was hurting my husband in a similar type of way by keeping secrets and going outside of our marriage to look for comfort and security rather than being willing to talk about how bad I was feeling with him. And there's a lot of reasons why that dynamic was going on that we now understand a little bit better. But I thought that the way out of that was going to be through this move that we were going to have back to Texas. So we lived in Colorado, going to grad school. I kind of thought maybe once we were out of that environment, everything would stop. And so we ended up finishing our graduate program, moving back to Texas. I was like, okay, I'm in the clear. Everything's going to be fine. We'll just have a brand new start. Again, bringing none of this to my husband. And in that state of pain and really my own sin at that point, I picked up another emotional and physical affair with another coworker. And that was something that broke me more than I even realized. I think I was willing to justify what I had done the first time. I don't know if or when I would have confessed to Ryan based on the first infidelity, but the second infidelity was what God really used to show me the extent of my own sin and shame. I remember reading through Psalm 51 and being absolutely heartbroken that I had first hurt and offended my first love, which was the Lord. And I had turned from him in my pain and unforgiveness and resentment, and instead was looking for my own way. And he used that psalm to bring about a heart of confession and a longer road of repentance. Took a little while for us to walk that out, but I think within months, I felt as if there was no way we could continue to live this lie. I could continue to live a lie without bringing that to my husband.
Wow. So then there was another due day and you had to disclose. Just a moment or two about that.
Yeah, well, I wish
it would have been nice if it was one day.
It would have been nice. Looking back, we would have loved to have learned, taken what we know now and just go back in time and reapply it. We would have saved ourselves a lot of pain. So yeah, confession for me looks like coming to him and giving him about 50% of the truth. Okay. Maybe in my mind, I was thinking 51% counts. If I could just get enough of the truth out there to get us into counseling together.
Okay.
to really, kind of address these long standing wounds and patterns of dysfunction that were starting to become very apparent now. I was more highly motivated because at that time we also were pregnant with our first daughter. And so I was really wanting to make sure that we could address all of these things, quickly before she
Yeah.
came into the world,
Yeah.
as if we could rush the process. So I had a disclosure and then trickle truth over the course of the next few months. And I would say it took about a full year and a half for me to have full disclosure.
Mm. And you guys have already alluded to, you don't recommend that. Trickling truth is not kindness.
No, and unfortunately, it's very common.
Yeah.
And so pretty much everyone we've worked with, there's been some form or fashion of that, and but yeah, the best advice we can say is, we know it's super hard, but this is
Yeah.
going to be a way to prevent more damage, because as a lot of us know, the hardest part of infidelity is not the sexual act, it's the betrayal. It's the lying. And with trickle truth, that lying is being is continuing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out to me as I listen to how both of you have shared those pieces of your story, and I'm sure we could park there for ages,
Mhm.
is the acts were important, but you are right up front talking about kind of the heart issues underneath, that
Mhm.
neither one of you woke up one day and decided, today I'm going to hurt my spouse, betray them, hurt the Lord, and mess up my future. There was something underneath. This is not excusing, it's unpacking and looking at
Yeah.
the dynamics so that there can be a future.
Mhm.
And just a moment, if each of you would, about what those heart matters were, and I'm sure it has taken time to even come to understand that for yourself, for yourselves. But can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to say first that yeah, throughout all this, the ways we hurt each other, I think throughout it all, like it might sound strange, but like we were still committed to being with each other. Like neither one of us at any point thought like, well, I want to leave this marriage. And I would say even like had loving feelings, that kind of in love feelings still in our marriage, but obviously things had really gotten off track through our sin. So for me, and this is something I've done, at this point, I've had the opportunity to explore, my story in
Yeah.
lots of different environments. So, for me, that this goes back to, how I dealt with, a lot of my emotional wounds in childhood. I was first exposed to pornography when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And, while that didn't become necessarily like a repetitive behavior that it would later, it stuck something in my mind, right? As far as like um, a fantasy world, something I could use to escape my reality. And, for most of my life, I would say I had the greatest childhood and the best parents, and I love my parents, and they've done so many things well. But in time, I've been able to really acknowledge how much I lacked, and how much they did not provide for me that I needed as a child, and really just that emotional realm of needing attunement, needing their attention to help me understand and process my own emotions, how to learn how to comfort myself when I was distressed. And obviously that starts before I can even really recall at this
Right.
point. But yeah, being able to name those things has certainly helped me. But pornography is right. It's, as you said, it's not really about sex, right?
Yeah.
It's really about this deep emotional need to feel comfort, to feel safe, to feel secure, where I was unable to feel that internally because I never learned to do that, and so
Yes.
it became this thing I latched onto to feel that. And I think there's space to understand those processes and have um, compassion for myself. That's one thing I've learned, is try to have compassion for myself and my temptations, and also to say, and that's absolutely wrong
Yes.
and destructive and hurtful, and I choose not to do that anymore. So that's been just some of the internal things I've
Yeah.
been able to explore within myself.
Good. Good. Really good. And Jessica, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having, kind of over a decade of recovery work has really allowed us to see, layer by layer and go deeper and deeper into what's really going on
Yes.
in each of us. And so I think some of the hard things that I was aware of were related to, again, like my family of origin. And I wouldn't say that I have big T trauma in my childhood, anything that would necessarily like stand out that would maybe seem like an obvious tie or connection into the things that I did. And that was hard for me, actually. I felt, I think, even more ashamed because I couldn't necessarily immediately look back and pinpoint, hey, because of this really large, big T trauma, here's maybe why I would have done what I did, but just started learning that the lack of emotional safety and the freedom to just be myself and to not have to emotionally maybe care for and take care of my parents in certain ways.
Yes.
Something that I have come to realize is that I am a very like deeply nurturing and caring person. If anybody is familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, and that serves me really well in my role as a mom and a wife and as a counselor. But when you start to learn the origin story for some of us as 2s, you start to realize that you became that at a really young age. And I was very attuned to my parents' needs, the needs of people around me, and very ill-equipped to even be able to name what I was feeling with any sort of compassion as well.
Wow.
And so probably by around middle school, high school, learned to live kind of this dual life, that I could be one way around my family and at church, and knew how to act, and really felt like I wanted to be that way. I didn't feel a strong sense of hurt by it. And yet I could also live this other way. And it was a little bit more rebellious. And I learned later that oftentimes for women, especially if you're exposed to sexual acting out, I was intimate. I had sex for the first time when I was 15 years old. And just saying that out loud makes me want to cry, because we have an almost 13-year-old daughter. And so just the reality of what I was doing and living, and how that was creating a duality in my heart that I didn't know how to reconcile. I wasn't sure how to take the things that I was learning and discovering and enjoying at church, let's say, and apply them outside of just strong guilt and shame.
Yeah.
This is bad. Don't do this. And then sure enough, the next week, I would find myself in the same trap as before. So just kind of that yearning to be loved and nurtured in the same way that I think I was very naturally tending to do that to others, created such a pattern in my heart of looking for that, wanting that, especially from other men, because it was a pattern that kind of was left unattended in high school. That pattern continued into college, into marriage, in the same way that Ryan was describing. I just kind of assumed that once somebody picked me for forever, that those patterns would reconcile themselves
Mhm.
without knowing that there was work to be done, because there was just like this giant canyon in between these two realities that I was living.
Yeah. There's a theme I've heard both of you touch on, that I'm sure has been a huge thing going forward. How have you dealt with shame? Because I think probably all of our listeners, any part of either of your stories that they're identifying with, um, it's touching on their shame too. I hear
Mm.
from people regularly that dynamic is huge. Can you comment a bit on that, either or maybe both, in your own experience, and then how do you help the people that you work with deal with the shame in all this?
It's such a big question.
Yeah, yeah.
You wanna
I
go?
And
mean,
we could
I
probably spend,
yeah,
days there,
yeah.
but
I mean,
it's a
I
biggie.
it's for sure. I mean, I think the foundational piece of that is talking about it,
Mm.
right?
Good.
And talking about the emotions and experiences that are wrapped around the shame is one thing. I think shame can do is really hijack these other emotions, right, and experiences, and just clump them into this ball of just wrong.
Yeah.
You're wrong for experiencing this. You're wrong for feeling these things.
Yes.
And so being able to talk about it with someone, with other people, and having the experience of, I get that. I experienced shame too, right? Shame is formed in relationship through relational wounds. And the way it's healed is in relationship through love and acceptance. So I think that's really the key piece of surrounding yourself with people, whether that's therapeutic environment, church group, but one where people are willing to explore their own shame and be honest about it, and also do that with you.
Yeah.
Something that I would add to that is even knowing how to hear and discern the difference between guilt and
Okay.
shame. And
Okay.
I think for me, it was all the same. So if I truly did something that was wrong and sinful, my experience of that was I am bad and wrong, rather than, and what I did is wrong. And here is how I can really like go to God in confession and repentance. That's the skill I think I learned maybe a little bit later in life, but earlier on, it looked like running further from God
Yes.
and running away from the people that I hurt in my sin, or it would look like turning to the people and talking about it with others who wouldn't name anything that we were doing as wrong or bad. And so it was so confusing to learn how to say this behavior, this act, even just like kind of what's going on inside of me, there is a wrongness to it, but it's valid and it makes sense. And there's a reason why these things are coming up. And so to be able to start to decipher between like, it's appropriate for me to have guilt and godly sorrow over what I did to you. And so feeling that brings me back into relationship, with Ryan specifically, to talk
Yeah.
about it with him. And when I'm met with, space and understanding and openness and honesty on his part, how he's really feeling, even if there is a desire to see me differently, that's something that we both kind of been working on separately and together. How do we see ourselves as we truly are, the way that God sees us, and then approach the things that we've done, like with a sober-mindedness
Yes.
about it.
Wow. So much there. And I really appreciate just the sense of vulnerability I feel in hearing you talk about some of those movements in both of your hearts,
Mm.
and the shame. I find myself saying to people fairly often that talking about it disinfects the shame. It's not that it immediately goes away, like it doesn't exist, but talking about it removes the power,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and to separate that from who I am, how God sees me.
Mhm.
I I want to get to how you help people work through these things in a second, but just one more
Mhm.
question about you guys' story. Um, both of you have stuff, and as you have been working through that stuff together, I am sure that there are little ways in which you have continued to fail each other, if I can be so bold as to suggest that. How have you dealt with? You still don't get everything you need from each other, although you are both trying and you are doing your work, and you have now, you said, for over a decade, which is beautiful. But how do you deal with the places you still lack for each other?
Mhm. I mean, to jump into that, I mean, it really looks like regular communication about it, like
Mhm.
being really willing to be just as vulnerable today as we were in those initial
Wow.
disclosures. And I think that that's been, the more we do it, I think the easier it can be. You know, I think going into times of conversation in the past, I would enter in with a lot of anxiety,
Mhm.
a lot of fear about what Brian's response might be or how he'll think of me. It was all kind of like projected onto him. I have what's called an anxious attachment system, and so from that system, I almost enter in an intense and sometimes heavy way. I was more the one guilty of marathoning and thinking we have to talk this out endlessly until we can get to a place where I feel
Yeah.
better,
Yeah.
rather than we will talk this out. We might need to, it might need to look a little bit different. And I also need to learn how to process things on my own and how to understand myself rather than expecting that to be something that Ryan does for me.
Yes.
So some of it is just even a willingness to do counseling at times when we need it and
Mhm.
invite other people in where we're falling short. So there's nothing about being counselors ourselves that qualify us to think that we have arrived. We for sure have not. But I think having that humility to say, we can't do this on our own,
It's good.
um, is just what I would share.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd love to both believe that we'll be free from our struggles, we'll grow to a place where we're beyond that. But I think, if anything we've learned is these things are a part of us and they always will be, right? And so I think just like you know, the Christian life isn't defined first and foremost by obedience, complete obedience to
Right.
God, right? But a quick repentance, right?
Mm.
And so that's something we try to apply to our marriage. Um, is not that we have expectations we won't hurt each other, disappoint each
Yes.
other, but it's what we do with that and trying to make a regular pattern of coming to each other to talk through our hurts is how we kind of, yeah, is a central part, I think, of
That's
maintaining
good.
our connection.
That's good. Would it be okay to say, if we can just raise our sights for a minute, that
Mhm.
this process has also brought goodness? We're not denying the parts of the struggle that show themselves, but are there times you guys enjoy each other in life?
Mm,
Yeah,
absolutely.
a lot more now. I mean, yeah, again, looking back, there's good memories mixed up in all this,
Sure.
even in the hardest times. But yeah, this is definitely brought much more of a levity, I think, to our relationship and a joy. There's really nothing hanging over,
Mhm.
us that's like uh, kind of quashing our enjoyment of each other and the gift that God's given us in marriage.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like how you said that, and it's brought us so much freedom
Yeah.
Mhm.
to like live naked and unashamed. Just like that emotional
Good.
freedom that's come from knowing I have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide, and if and when we hurt each other along the way, that I trust that he's going to be a safe person to hold. my sin and my mistakes, and same with me. And I wanted to back up for a second, because when we were talking about these things that we know to be true, I just want to emphasize it is easier said than done.
Yes.
And so even though there's this like deep well of confidence and enjoyment and experience, I mean, if we get into a conflict, it's still hard. I mean, I'm for sure, known for hours of crying in my own pain. And that's not because of something that he has said or done. It's because it's just hard. It's hard to feel disconnected. It's hard to feel mad at one another. It's painful. We would rather avoid it if we could.
Yeah, we don't ever want to paint the picture for people that our worst is behind us. I think we'd like to, but we still have moments, kind of where those other selves show up, and we're just like, wow, how are we here again? But again, I think those times have become fewer and more far between, and we're thankful for that.
Yeah. I appreciate that realistic picture.
Mhm.
I didn't want to stay just in the depths, meaning that there's no joy, but also that the moments of joy don't mean there isn't work yet to be done, that both are true.
Well said.
I do want to talk just a bit about how you help people with all of this. You've been in counseling. You guys have a counseling office together. You're part of a Fair Recovery, and you're going to be part of a Hope Rising conference coming up. And this is what your counseling is about, and the conference you're going to be a part of is all about. But can you maybe mention just a couple important pieces on what the healing journey is like for people who have experienced this kind of pain in their marriage? And God, we're not going to have time to unpack every detail, but just a little bit about what the journey can be like for them.
I'll say, because I've been doing our private practice just ever since we've gotten out of grad school, and working more so with women and couples. And then Ryan has a little bit more experience working with men and couples. And so I'll say that I've seen women who have experienced betrayal and who have also been unfaithful in their marriages. So it looks a little different, kind of depending on which type of pain you're walking through. But what I would say on a whole is that people come in with high discouragement, high shame, feeling as though there's no possible way someone could understand or would be even able to possibly, work toward hope and healing in the marriage. And so a lot of what we do is to give that hope and encouragement that this part of your story is not what has to define you. We do share our story more vulnerably, because I think it gives glimpses of hope that there is a way through. And even in the ways that we didn't receive the support that we needed at the front end, like we still found a way with God's help. It took longer than we would have liked. And so some of how we help others is to be a little bit more transparent about our own story of pain, because it points to a God who has never let go of us. And so we also see it as a way of allowing people to know God and see God differently than they might imagine him to be.
Yes.
So I think it's just so important to recognize that people come in, and usually in counseling then experience, we would hope something different than they would expect. What would you add to that?
Yeah. And I think like the community aspect of healing is so important, because so many individuals and even a couple, trying to heal from infidelity together, like that's often still very isolating. And there's good reasons for that. It's a tough thing. And so people having, a community, even if it's signing up for a program, so it's not naturally people around them, but finding people. And that's why we love a Fair Recovery and the work that they do, the programs they have. We were just at an intensive retreat, and just to see in 3 short days, what happens when you have, people coming in as strangers,
Mm,
but sharing their story, working through their pain together, beginning to heal together. It just forms such a quick bond
yeah,
that is really incredible, and so needed for people. And so, yeah, I would say, finding a community of people where that's people you have around you, right? That
yeah,
that
yeah.
can help you. Maybe not everyone, knows what to do with infidelity, but if you have people, who love you, love your marriage, care for you, right? Those are people that can help. And so I want to encourage people to reach out to who they have, and then, yeah, look, if that's limited, or you just need the support, there's these plenty of programs out there
That's good.
now, that can help people as well.
That's good. That's good. Um, you too are going to be a part of the Hope Rising conference coming up. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. I understand this is virtual, so people can watch
Mhm.
from anywhere. Can you
Mhm.
just give just like the the highlight version of what this is about and what your part is going to be in this conference?
Yeah, so this year, this is our 6th year to do Hope Rising through a Fair Recovery. And it's for betrayed spouses, men and women. And so it's virtual. People can tune in from wherever they are. And it's a full day. It's Saturday, September the 30th. And they can buy tickets. And even if you can't make it that day or watch live, you'll have access to watch it at another time. But what I love about it is that there's a lot of safety in knowing there are other people who are hurting and might
Yeah.
get it in a different way than even your spouse or other people in your community might get it. And so we want to make sure it's a very safe environment where betrayed men and women can come and get encouragement, hope, really good resources. So last year, Ryan and I think we did like the Q&A
Mhm.
portion. So there's usually a Q&A during the day. This year, I'm just going to be the one talking,
Mhm.
and I'm doing the topic of facing insecurities,
Mm,
which is going to be such a big topic. I'm not sure how I will completely boil it down, but there's going to be, I believe, a handful of speakers,
yeah.
and we're all going to be talking about different topics that we think betrayed partners will really benefit from hearing, and just knowing kind of what to do and how to move forward. And then there's a chance to meet other people and get connected through small groups that way.
Mm, that's really good. I have a feeling like there's just a whole lot more we could unpack, but I want to thank you guys for being as vulnerable as you have, for the honesty about the challenges of the journey, but also that there is hope, like the name of the conference, Hope Rising, that
Mhm.
you don't have to stay stuck.
Right.
We'll make sure again that links to your counseling center and to the conference and so on are in the show notes. This has been an honor and much joy and blessings to you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Sam. Thanks for having us, and thank you for the work that you do as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I told you it was a story. I know that that opened up some places in your heart. Do check the links under this video. We've got the link there for McDaniel Counseling. And we have the link for the Hope Rising Conference, the online virtual conference happening September 30. And I do want to tell you that the early bird pricing is good through the end of July. So you're watching this in July. Don't wait until September to get your ticket. Get the ticket now before the price goes up at the end of July. Early bird price only for the next several days through the end of July. The, the needs that lead you to do what you do. You heard us talk about that in this conversation. We have a couple links also under this video to some things that can help you unpack that in your own soul, about what happens when your needs don't get met in marriage. How do you keep your sanity? We have an article of mine about that. Also have an article about how do you fill up your empty soul? How do you proactively take action to fill up those needs when you're not getting them from other people. No other human being can completely fill you up. So addressing some of that. As you heard, the healing process is not quick, but it is possible. I also want to let you know that I do coaching regularly with individuals and couples, whether it's about this kind of pain or something in the general neighborhood of that. I would be honored to hear from you. You'll find the link to our coaching page where you can find out a little bit more about how I can work with you if you need some of that kind of help. I want to thank you for sticking with me on this program. Do subscribe to this channel so that you can get the material anytime we put something up. That would be a delight. And until next time, may God bless you.